السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين، حبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المنتجبين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا. قال تعالى في كتابه الحكيم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا أيها الإنسان ما غرك بربك الكريم الذي خلقك فسواك فعدلك في أي صورة ما شاء ركبك. صدق الله العلي العظيم، وصلوا على محمد وآل محمد. In sermon number 221 of Nahj al-Balagha, Al-Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam reflects on the verse of the Quran, Surah Al-Infitar, chapter 82, verse 6. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Ya ayyuha al-insanu ma gharraka bi rabbika al-kareem. O mankind, what has deluded you with regard to your noble Lord? The Imam here speaks of the state of delusion or deception that we find ourselves in. And he explains the following. He says, what has deceived you about Allah, and what has made you satisfied with the destruction of yourself? Here, specifically, the Imam is describing that how disobedience, when we disobey, the path of disobedience is the path of self-destruction. And since intrinsically we have, we have this fitrah, this internal guiding mechanism, which deep down we know the difference between right and wrong. We know that when we are committing an act of disobedience, and if we continue down that path, it will lead us down the path of destruction, self-destruction. He says, if you know this intrinsically, then why do you insist on going down this path? Is there no cure for your ailment or no awakening from your sleep? And then he strikes a point, an example. He says, do you not have pity on yourself as you have on others? When you see someone who is in need, when you see someone who is suffering, if you see someone who's sick, for instance, don't you feel pity for that person? Don't you feel sorry for that person? Well, then why don't you feel sorry for yourself? Why don't you feel pity upon yourself when you are on the path of disobedience? And then he gives an example. He says, when you see anyone exposed to the heat of the sun, you cover him with shade. If you were to walk in the street today and you saw someone exposed to the heat of the sun, generally, if you can stop and help that person, your conscience would tell you to stop and help that person. Cover them from the shade so that they're not affected by the heat. Or if you see anyone afflicted with grief that pains his body, you weep out of pity for him. Sometimes people are so struck with grief that they feel the pain in their body, correct? If you've ever felt intense grief over the loss of a loved one, for instance, sometimes that grief becomes so severe that you start to feel it in your body as if someone inflicted physical pain upon you. He says, if you see anyone afflicted with that type of grief, automatically you start to weep out of pity for him. Then he says, what has then made you patient over your own disease? You weep for somebody else, but you are also diseased. You are also ill. You're suffering from the very same illness. What has made you patient? Why do you not weep over your own disease? What has made you firm in your own afflictions? And what has consoled you from weeping over yourself, although your life is the most precious of all lives? All of us, he points to this reality, all of us, no matter how altruistic we come across, no matter how selfless we try to portray ourselves, at the end of the day, we all love ourselves more than we love anyone else. And that's okay, that's fine. Loving yourself, there's nothing wrong with it if it doesn't lead to narcissism. If loving yourself in a healthy way does not lead to narcissism, you have to love yourself and respect yourself and honor yourself. He says, you see people that you feel pity for and grief, and you weep over them, then why are you patient with your own pain when you are on the path of disobedience? So this is one aspect of looking up the verse. Ya ayyuhal insanu ma gharraka bi rabbika al-kareem. O mankind, what has deluded you in regard to your noble Lord? Then he explains another aspect of the verse. He says, when describing God, he says, He is calling you to His forgiveness and concealing your faults with His kindness while you are fleeing away from Him towards others. We spoke about this last week or the week before. Concealment. Sattarul uyub. Ghaffarul dhunub. God is the ultimate concealer of defects. He continues to conceal your defects, and you continue to misbehave and disobey, and you flee away from Him towards others. Why do you do this? Why are you so deluded? Why do you stay in this nature of delusion and deception? Why can you not confront the reality? It says, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is so powerful, who's so generous. How humble and weak are you, and still so bold to commit His disobedience, although you live in His protection and undergo changes of life in the expanse of His kindness. Meaning that your life will not move forward if it's not for the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You're seeing the changes. You're seeing how your life improves, how He continues to bless you while you are undeserving of it, and you still continue to disobey. I want to share a narration with you from our 8th Imam, Al-Imam Ali ibn Musa al-Rida alayhi salam. He says the following. He says, this is from the book Uyun Akhbar al-Rida, which is a compilation of the narrations of our 8th Imam. The Imam says the following. He says, قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله. Rasulullah said, peace be upon him, يقول الله تبارك وتعالى يا ابن آدم. God says the following. O son of Adam, ما تنصفني أتحبب إليك بالنعم وتتمقت إلي بالمعاصي. Imagine, God says to us, the slave, the servant, the master says to the slave, that you have not been just towards me. That I show you love in the form of blessings, and you reciprocate it, loathing me through your acts of disobedience. When someone shows you love, you want to reciprocate love back to them. God says, I show you love through my blessings. And how do you reciprocate that love? Through acts of disobedience. ما تنصفني أتحبب إليك بالنعم وتتمقت إلي بالمعاصي خيري إليك نازل وشرك إلي صاعد. That whatever descends from me to you is good, خير. I don't send anything bad your way. I don't send anything evil your way. How do you reciprocate it? Do you send goodness back to me? Kindness back to me? You reciprocate it with acts of disobedience. وَلَا يَزَالُ مَلَكٌ كَرِيمٌ. He says that there is an angel يأتيني عنك في كل يوم وليلة بعمل قبيح. That an angel comes to me every day and every night and reports about your misdeeds. يا ابن آدم لو سمعت وصفك من غيرك وأنت لا تعلم من الموصوف لسارعت إلى مقته. O son of Adam, if someone were to describe you and you did not know who is being described, you would quickly judge that person. But because it's you, you would never judge yourself. If someone were to describe you right now and you did not know who is being described, you would judge that person. But because it's you, Your ego tells you not to judge yourself. Your ego likes to justify everything. يا ابن آدم لو سمعت وصفك من غيرك وأنت لا تعلم من الموصوف لسارعت إلى مقته. Very powerful words. This is hadith Qudsi. So, Al-Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam is pointing towards this reality. And then, furthermore, he says the following. He says, the way that you treat God, that you reciprocate the goodness that He sends to you with evil, he says that if this had been the case with two persons who were equal in power and matching in might, imagine your colleague, your spouse, your significant other, your brother, someone who is equal to you in creation and also equal in might. If you treated that person the same way you treated God, meaning that you reciprocated their absolute goodness with absolute evil, he said you would have been the first to adjudge yourself to be of bad behavior and evil deeds. Then why do you do it to God? Why is it okay to reciprocate the goodness that God sends to us with evil? Have we thought about this? Have you taken it into your consciousness? I truthfully say that the world has not deceived you, but you have had yourself deceived by it. A lot of people like to blame the world for their problem. Oh, it's, the dunya got to me. Why did you allow yourself to be deceived by it? We live in an era where people, just no accountability. Nobody wants to be held responsible for everything. Says it's not stop blaming the dunya and the shaitan so much. Get to a point in your life where you need to take ownership. It's you. You've been making these choices. And you have to bear the consequences of your choices. So, it's very interesting. The Imam alayhi salam extracts these meanings from the verse, Ya ayyuhal insanu ma gharraka bi rabbika al-kareem. O mankind, what has deluded you or what has deceived you when in regards to your noble Lord? So, it's interesting because when the Imam says, if this had been the case with two persons equal in power, so it reminded me of, we talk about the golden rule is to treat people around you, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Or another way of saying it is treat people the way that you want to be treated. But in order for this to be effective, this principle, we have to ask ourselves, well, how do we want to be treated? There's an author who actually makes an interesting point about this, Dr. Jordan Peterson. He wrote a book called 12 Rules for Life, and rule number 2, he says that treat yourself like someone you are responsible for helping. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So we say treat others the way that you want to be treated. Well, how do you treat yourself first? You have to figure out how you want to be treated first. So he says, treat yourself like someone you are responsible for helping. Imagine if someone was in your care. Imagine if you were taking care of a family member or a pet. Let's start with a pet. Because studies have shown that, there was a study done that showed that people under the age of 35 are more likely to take their pet to a veterinarian than they themselves are to to visit their doctor. Can you believe that? Statistics show that most people who are given a prescription by their doctor, a good portion of them don't fill that prescription. And then the ones that do fill that prescription don't actually take the prescription. And some of them, very, very small percentage of them actually take the medication. So you have to figure out, why is it that we prioritize somebody else over ourselves? Now that's not to say be selfish and don't take care of anyone else, or don't take care of your pets if you have pets in the home. But what's the psychology behind us wanting to take care? I talk to people sometimes and they spend so much money on vitamins and all this stuff and nobody even takes them. It just sits there on the shelf. It expires. You find out 5 years later that, why is this the case? Why do people behave like this? I don't know. I'm not sure. So you have to treat yourself like someone you that the way that you would treat someone that you are responsible for helping. Only then, when you start treating yourself with respect and with love and with honor and with kindness, then the golden rule becomes effective. Then it becomes meaningful. Then you can tell people, treat others the way that you want to be treated. Because you want to be treated with respect and honor, and you've proven that through your own actions, the way you treat yourself. Then you can start to treat other people in that way. That's how the golden rule becomes meaningful. So branching off of that, I just wanted to share with you a narration, and this is a narration that I've shared before. But it says the following, and this is found in Bihar al-Anwar. The narration is from our sixth Imam, Al-Imam Ja'far bin Muhammad al-Sadiq alayhi salam. He says the following. He says, Al-Muslim akhul Muslim. A believer, a Muslim, is the brother of another Muslim. وَهُوَ عَيْنُهُ وَمِرْآتُهُ وَدَلِيلُهُ. And he is his eye, he is his mirror, and he is his guide. That's the relationship that a believer has with another believer. Al-Muslim akhul Muslim, وَهُوَ عَيْنُهُ وَمِرْآتُهُ وَدَلِيلُهُ. A Muslim is the brother of a Muslim. He is his eye, he is his mirror, and he is his guide. So what does it mean for a believer to be the mirror of a believer? Al-Marhum, one of our scholars who passed away recently, Al-Allama Sayyid Adil Alawi, who was, he was a giant in the world of commentary on akhlaq, and he says the following. He gives a commentary on the hadith Al-Mu'min Mir'atul Mu'min, that a believer is the mirror of a believer. He talks about what is the function of a mirror. Why is it significant? Why are those words chosen? Why is it that a believer is the mirror of another believer? What is the function of a believer? I want to share with you some of his thoughts that he shared in this regard. He said, number one, for a mirror to properly project or reflect the object in front of it, it's got to be cleaned, right? Sometimes you don't clean a mirror for 6 months or a year, for, I don't know, maybe for the single people out there who nobody comes into your home, you leave it dirty, and then all of a sudden you clean it, and what happens? You feel like you look better. No, you don't look better. It's just that you clean the mirror, right? So in order for a mirror to properly reflect the object in front of it, it's got to be clean. It's got to be pure. So he says in relation to this hadith that a believer is a mirror of a believer, al-mu'min mir'atul mu'min, that if you're trying to reflect and you're trying to show a believer what is within them, whether it's through criticism or through praise, you have to, number one, work on yourself. Now, that's not to say that you have to be perfect before you give admonishment or advice. We had a teacher who used to say that never see yourself as too big to receive admonishment, and never see yourself as too small to give admonishment. Right? So it's not that you have to be perfect, but if you chase perfection, you get to excellence. And the more that you work on yourself, the more you begin to gain clarity. The hadith says, Al-Mu'min yanzuru bi'aynillah, that a believer, through his purification, becomes like, he begins to see what God sees. Of course, to an extent. Not everything that God sees, because our sight is limited. But what it refers to is the fact that the more that you work on yourself on the inside, the more you start to gain clarity of people and issues that surround you. The better you're able to point things out. So purifying yourself from the inside so that you can gain clarity, so that you can become a proper reflection for a believer. This is number one. Number two, he says that a clean mirror not only reflects imperfections or flaws and blemishes, but it also highlights pure attributes. It also highlights adornments. There's a reason why when you walk into a salon or a barber shop, they have mirrors with lights around them? It's because it's not only there to highlight your blemishes and what needs to be worked on, but also once you're done, you get to see how good you look. So when you're standing as a reflection in front of someone, don't be the type of person that only points out their blemishes and their imperfections. If you find an opportunity to praise them, if you find an opportunity to highlight their strong points, do so. There's a story that I always refer to, and I've probably told this story a dozen times, but I like to repeat it because it's very meaningful. And it's from the book How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. So I'm going to recommend you read that book. And in chapter one is on how to win friends and influence people, is never criticize, condemn, or complain. And he tells a story of Charles Schwab, who lived during the late 1800s, early 1900s. He worked for a man by the name of Andrew Carnegie, who was one of the wealthiest men in the United States, who had a large railroad business and steel business and all of that. And by the time Charles Schwab was in his mid-30s, he was running the entire company. And Andrew Carnegie would pay him $1 million a year. Now, adjusted for inflation in 1920, $1 million a year is about between $12 to $14 million today. And when they asked him what the key to his success was, and why he had gained that position, he said, it's not because I know more about steel than the guys that I manage. They're much smarter than me. He says, the secret to my success, or at least one of the secrets to his success, is the following statement. He says, I am hearty in my approbation and lavish in my praise. I know how to praise people. I know how to highlight the best attributes within them. And because I do that, I know how to bring out the best in them. I'm not walking around just criticizing people, and he gives an example of it. He says one day he was walking around the factory floor, and there was a few guys there smoking cigarettes inside the factory, which was against the protocol. Now, he could have taken the approach where he said, hey, what's wrong with you guys? We got heavy machinery here, you're not supposed to be smoking. But he walked up to them, and he handed each one of them a cigar. And he said, gentlemen, I trust that you will smoke these outside. Now, I'm not saying go around handing people cigars. That's just contextual, meaning right there. But he knew how to bring out the best in people. He knew how to praise people. He knew not to hurt people when it came to correcting their actions. Not that he ignored their actions completely and he turned a cheek because he wanted to maintain reputation with them or save face. He told them what they needed to hear, but he did it in a way where he saved their face, where he did not humiliate them. Because as human beings, we do not tolerate humiliation. What does God say in the Quran? What makes us distinct from all other creations, from animals? God says, وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ, that we gave Banu Adam karama, honor, and dignity. That's the most valuable thing that we have. So never take that away from someone. So, and of course there are studies that show that when we receive praise, what happens in our mind? That, the dopamine that kicks in. And what goes on in the brain with the circuitry and all that. I don't want to get too deep into that, but that's the way that we can become a mirror. So number 3, he says that a mirror also tells the truth. It doesn't exaggerate, nor does it understate. Now some mirrors kind of exaggerate if it's not clear, or if it's not a proper mirror. Sometimes it's, you go to the mirror at the gym, and for some reason, I think they do this on purpose, where it makes you look wider and more muscular, right? Or in better shape, and then you go home and it looks different. I think there's intention behind that. But we're talking about a legit mirror, not a phony mirror. It doesn't exaggerate, and it doesn't understate. It tells you it shows you what you need to see. Sometimes, if we're offering someone advice, we tend to either exaggerate, but more often than not, we tend to understate, because we don't want to hurt someone's feelings. We don't want to tell them the truth that we see, because we don't want to hurt their feelings. Well, if you let things slide, and most of us are people pleasers, and we're afraid of telling the truth, and we let things slide. But you don't want to exaggerate, nor do you want to understate. You want to give an accurate depiction when you are mirroring someone. Number 4 is, what does a mirror do? A mirror shows you what's happening in the moment that you stand in front of it. When you stand in front of a mirror, it doesn't wait for you to walk away for it to show you your reflection. You get the reflection as soon as you stand in front of it. So in a way, it kind of confronts you face to face. And that's why it's important that if we are going to praise someone, or if we are going to offer them a word of advice, that we do it face to face, not behind their back. The Quran says, وَلَا يَغْتَبْ بَعْضُكُمْ بَعْضًا. Do not engage in backbiting. أَيُحِبُّ أَحَدُكُمْ أَن يَأْكُلَ لَحْمَ أَخِيهِ مَيْتًا فَكَرِهْتُمُوهُ. It equates backbiting with eating the flesh of your brother's carcass, his dead body. So, confrontation. There's a method in coaching that's called SSIP, sincere, specific, immediate, and personal. If you're to coach someone, if you're to give them advice, number one, make it sincere, not flattery. And that's the difference between praise and flattery. Some people ask, well, you talk about being hardy in your approbation and lavish in your praise. The difference between praise and flattery is that one is sincere and the other is insincere. Well, how do you know the difference between what's sincere and what's not sincere? You know the difference. You could tell. You know that when you're giving sincere praise versus insincere. And the person who's on the other end also knows when it's sincere versus when it's not sincere. So number one, sincere. Specific. Specific. Give specific. Don't make it about something else. Make it about the issue. And immediate. Strike when the iron is hot. Because when someone does something commendable and you praise them, emotionally they're engaged. And so your words will have a deeper effect when they're emotionally engaged. And number four is personal. Make it personal to them. So, number five, he says that a mirror calmly reflects. A mirror doesn't get angry. It shows you what is. So when you're responding, when you're mirroring someone, you don't want to react. You want to respond. There's a difference between responding and reacting. Maintaining civility. A couple weeks ago, I shared the story of Imam Zayn al-Abidin alayhi salam, the man who came to insult him. And what did he do? Throughout that entire conversation, he maintained civility before responding. And the Quran teaches us, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, وَلَا تَسْتَوِ الْحَسَنَةُ وَلَا السَّيِّئَةُ. That good is not equal to evil. ادفع بالتي هي أحسن فإذا الذي بينك وبينه عداوة كأنه ولي حميم. That if someone comes to you and is vulgar and is nasty, don't try to respond in kind. A lot of us, we try to respond in kind. And we try to one-up the person. If you insult my mother, I'm going to insult your mother and your father. And if you insult my mother and father, I'm going to insult both of them and your tribe. And then we start to one-up one another. That I can give it just as hard as I can get it. The Quran says, وَلَا تَسْتَوِ الْحَسَنَةُ وَلَا السَّيِّئَةُ. You think that good and evil, kindness and vulgarity are equal. They're not equal. Kindness is much more powerful and much more valuable than vulgarity. ادفع بالتي هي أحسن. Respond to vulgarity with kindness. فإذا الذي بينك وبينه عداوة كأنه ولي حميم. You will see the person in front of you that you have enmity with transform, and you will win their heart over through your akhlaq, not through responding in vulgarity. The narration says, الغضب جمرة الشيطان توقد في قلب ابن آدم. Anger is like a burning piece of charcoal that the shaitan casts into the heart of man. So don't respond with anger. Don't respond with vulgarity. And number 6, finally, that a mirror does not hold grudges. As many defects as it sees, it reflects the truth the same way every time. Think about your mirror in your bathroom. It sees you every morning with that beautiful face when you wake up in the morning, that messy hair and that unwashed face. It doesn't hold a grudge after the 10th time and say, man, you really look terrible today. It just shows you what you are. It doesn't exaggerate. So the same way, we see defects from one another. We see imperfections from one another constantly as believers. As many defects as you see, continue to speak the truth. Don't allow the sheer volume of imperfections that you witness in a person affect your mirroring and your reflection of them. Continue to tell them the truth. Do not exaggerate or do not understate. So, going back to that first point, that the hadith says, Al-Muslim akhul Muslim. A Muslim is the brother of another. وَهُوَ عَيْنُهُ وَمِرْآتُهُ وَدَلِيلُهُ. He is his ayn, he is his eye, right? He looks out for him, he shows him the vision. وَمِرْآتُهُ. He is his mirror. وَدَلِيلُهُ. He is his guide. لَا يَخُونُهُ وَلَا يَظْلِمُهُ. He does not cheat him, nor does he oppress him. وَلَا يَخْدَعُهُ وَلَا يُكَذِّبُهُ. He does not deceive him, nor does he lie to him, or not tell him the truth. وَلَا يَخْتَابُهُ. He does not backbite. He doesn't speak behind his back. And then going back to the narration of Imam Amir al-Mu'minin alayhi salam, he says, if you treat yourself with kindness and honor and respect, and you treat your brothers and sisters with honor and respect, then how should you treat God? Why is it that you treat God with less respect than you treat yourself or with others? This is something for us to think about. The Quran says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Ya ayyuha al-insanu ma gharraka excuse me. يا أيها الإنسان ما غرك بربك الكريم الذي خلقك فسواك فعدلك. The one who created you, proportioned you, and balanced you. He not only created you, he proportioned you and he balanced you. Because creation is one thing, and then creating something in a proportionate and balanced way is something else. You know, I can walk into the kitchen and just throw a bunch of ingredients together and say I created a meal. But that doesn't mean that it's proportioned, nor does it mean that it's balanced. In order for a meal to be proportioned and balanced, you have to know how to work with salt and heat and spices and all that stuff, all that good stuff, which I'm not very interested in. But to create something balanced. So he's saying that your Lord has made favors upon you. He didn't just create you and leave you in the wild. He proportioned you. He balanced you. في أي صورة ما شاء ركبك. And he assembled you in any form that he willed, and in the best form. لقد خلقنا الإنسان في أحسن تقويم. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that he blesses us in these final days of the month of Sha'ban, that we all reach the month of Ramadan, and that it is a month of mercy and blessings upon us all. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. اللهم اغفر للمؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين والمسلمات الأحياء منهم والأموات تابع بيننا وبينهم بالخيرات إنك مجيب الدعوات إنك قاضي الحاجات إنك على كل شيء قدير برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين وصلى الله وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين